So good evening and thank you all for coming. Tonight, the Booksmith is very pleased to welcome Jeff Tamarkin for a talk and book signing to mark the publication of Got a Revolution. Much has been said and much has been written about the Jefferson Airplane. They are certainly one of the great rock bands to emerge from the San Francisco scene. Here to tell us about the turbulent flight of that legendary band is someone who knows the band intimately, a longtime rock music journalist and editor who has also written liner notes for more than 25 Jefferson Airplane related CDs. Please welcome Jeff Tamarkin.
Thank you all for coming. This is actually a kind of a homecoming for me because the year that this store opened in 1976, I was literally living on the corner here of Haight and Clayton. And that's also the year that I started writing about music. And one of the first things I did when I began writing about music professionally was to start gathering up interview material with these people. And went over to 2400 Fulton and spoke to David Freiberg and Craig Chiquiso. Eventually, Yorma Jack Grace and the rest of them, so this is really cool for me to be here, so thank you for coming. Since this book was published, I've noticed that it seems to get one of two reactions from people. That those that don't know much about the airplane kind of wonder, why? What is a Jefferson Airplane? Why would anybody want to read a book about a Jefferson Airplane, and let alone write one? And then there's you guys who are probably thinking, finally, after all these years, somebody finally was crazy enough to do this. So one of the first questions I'm usually asked when I do these things is, why did you do this book? And even though it's kind of obvious to me, I have to answer the question. And I've been thinking in terms of Sir Edmund Hillary, who looked up at Mount Everest where nobody else had ever been there, and said, why has nobody ever climbed this thing? I guess I'll be the one to do it. Jefferson Airplane is an amazing story, and it just shocked me that when I went into bookstores and looked in the music section, no Jefferson Airplane books. There were dozens and dozens of books on every other band, Grateful Dead, Rolling Stones, and Dylan, Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, etc. But nobody had ever done Jefferson Airplane, so I figured it was high time to do it. I mean, there's even books on Three Dog Night, so. One of the obvious reasons is that this was a hugely popular band, even though they were sort of, quote unquote underground. They were not lightweights. I mean, they sold a whole lot of records, millions of records. They appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show and the Smothers Brothers Show and Johnny Carson, and they were on the cover of Life magazine and all these other, high-profile publications. And also they were really the face of the Haight-Ashbury at that time. And when journalists from out of town wanted to know what was going on in San Francisco, that's where they went, was the airplane. They were really the first band to break out of San Francisco before the Dead or Janis or Santana or any of them. So they were really high profile from day one, and it just really surprised me that nobody had ever done this before. So I kind of elected myself to be the person insane enough to do this. The airplane was kind of considered the poster children of the San Francisco hippies, even though it's debatable whether they were even hippies. Spencer made a funny comment one day. He said, we were into guns and mayhem. What is this hippie crap, And whenever the media needed somebody to explain what was going on here, that's where they went. And the other obvious reason that the media flocked to the airplane was Grace Slick. Let's face it. If I was a magazine editor in 1967, 68, and I wanted to put a band on it and put a person from the airplane on the cover of my magazine, with all due respect, it wasn't going to be Yorma or Jack. It's going to be Grace, So, but she, to me, she was really the first strong rock woman. She, before Grace, you had a lot of pop singers, Dusty Springfield and Leslie Gore and people like that, Connie Francis. But nobody had ever stood in front of a band and said, "I'm one of the guys. I'm going to be treated like one of the guys. I'm going to treat you worse than any of the guys ever treated you." And she made great copy. She was very quotable, and of course, by '67, when the alternative, quote unquote alternative media started out with Rolling Stone, Ben Von Torres, people like that, the airplane was just naturals for that whole scene. FM radio, the underground scene, KSAN and KMPX, all the stations just loved the airplane. They were also a very significant band culturally. It's not just that they had hit records, they influenced, an entire generation of young people, people my age and most of your age. I see them along the same lines as Dylan and the Beatles and the Stones, very few others. When I grew up on the East Coast on Long Island, which is not a fun place to grow up. And, seeing what was going on here in San Francisco, I just knew this is what I wanted to be. I wanted to get out here, I wanted to be part of this environment and be like these people, for better or worse. And it took me a few years, but I did get out here and do that. They had a really huge impact on their generation. They were at the forefront of a really large-scale movement, to the point that they really frightened the status quo. The airplane had a huge FBI file. It's really fascinating stuff. They were followed wherever they went. In every city, there were police tagging along, and they had their share of busts, even though none of them ever did time, remarkably. But they were outspoken. They were anti-authoritarian, and they really made certain people worry, which is kind of funny to think about, now. But back then, they were a force to be reckoned with. The other obvious reason is the music. To me, it was just always spectacular. The first time I heard the airplane was in early '67, when most people east of San Francisco heard them. And it's the first time I ever heard Somebody to Love on the radio. I just said, there's something about this band that speaks to me. And then followed by White Rabbit and the rest of the Surrealistic Pillow album. I just had to know what these people were going to do, and still want to know what these people are going to do. Now that I know what they've done, maybe a little different story, but it's been an interesting ride. I followed them throughout the '70s, '80s, up until now, and it's just kind of bothered me that over the years they've sort of been neglected or forgotten by rock radio, especially if you listen to what's left of classic rock radio. You're lucky if you hear White Rabbit, Somebody Love, Miracles, and maybe Marty's Song Hearts, a couple other things, but their catalog is so strong. I mean, the first 6 albums especially, every track on there is worth hearing, and it just really drove me nuts that certain great songs of theirs have just been forgotten over time. So it's another reason I wanted to do this book. And lastly, they simply have a great story. The more I spoke to these people and collected information, I just could not believe some of the tales. To me, it's even more fascinating than the Beatles story. It's just amazing some of the things these people went through and some of the things they did, and the fact that they were all still here to tell it. When you think about the other major '60s bands, Beatles, Stones, The Who, they're all, Beach Boys, they've all lost members, but all the Airplane is still really here to talk about it. Just going to take a break here to read the introduction of the book. This is when I was interviewing the band members, one thing I quickly found out is that telling the truth was going to be kind of hard to do, because I don't think there is a truth when it comes to the Airplane. I would ask all 6 band members the same question, get 6 completely different answers. And I happened to mention this to Paul Kantner one day, and he said, well, did you ever see the movie Rashomon? It's a Japanese movie from the '50s. And I had seen it, and as soon as he made that connection, I said, okay, I know where you're going with this, because he's right. It's really, the Airplane really were the rock and roll Rashomon, so that's where I started off this intro. In Akira Kurosawa's 1950 Japanese film classic Rashomon, 4 strangers are discussing a rape and a murder. Each agrees that brutal crimes have been committed, but that's about all they can agree on. The seductive film's strength is that it presents each side of the story in a completely plausible way, so that the viewer comes away unsure which of the versions presented is the truth, if any. Like Rashomon, the story of Jefferson Airplane, the band's Paul Kantner has astutely postulated, is also one of many truths. There's a cliche these days: if you can remember the '60s, you weren't there. It's a wisecrack intended to imply that denizens of that era were so zonked out that their craniums have been reduced to space dust. But that's not the case here. The former members of Jefferson Airplane were there all right, and they do remember the '60s. Yet each had such a distinctive personality and outlook on life, and the '60s was such a kaleidoscopic whirl, that despite being in the same band, no 2 of them experienced the Airplane years the same way. As in Rashomon, reality here is a composite, or a close approximation of one, that materializes when all the jagged pieces of the jigsaw puzzle are locked into place. Through interviews, extensive research, am I still here? Common sense and process of elimination, an epic tale slowly and incredibly emerges. Jefferson Airplane was comprised of highly creative, forward-thinking individuals who, by happenstance, found themselves involved in one another's lives at the vortex of the 60s. Breaking down barriers, challenging authority on oneself, walking on the edge of society's rules. It was a way of life not only for the airplane, but for a generation. A genuine youth movement was unfolding, something that had never before occurred. Whether the young, led by the cutting-edge rock bands of the day, were going to change the world was never the question in the 60s, only how. Today we may snicker at the naivete of such sentiments, an honest belief that rock musicians who sometimes had trouble finding their own feet could somehow make a serious dent on global politics and basic human consciousness. But perhaps the notion isn't as nutty as it seems in this revisionist, jaded age. More was accomplished than some care to admit. A revolution did occur, even if most of its skirmishes involved ideas and words, rather than weapons and bloodshed. For San Francisco's Jefferson Airplane, music was the vehicle toward change. They celebrated freedom, growth, searching, risk-taking, adventure, independence, open-mindedness, love, and good old fun. Their music promoted strength in the face of adversity and staring mortality in the eye. It rejected phoniness and fear, especially of the unknown and the hostile. It proclaimed that it was okay, even recommended, to believe in the impossible, to trust oneself, to surrender to fate and encourage chaos. The Airplane, in a manner of speaking, even said it was okay to be a jerk, as long as being a jerk was what you really wanted to be. Just as there are few definitives in the Jefferson Airplane story, there is no single accepted way of experiencing their music. For some, the Airplane was at its core a collective of superb musicians honing their craft as they went along, engaging in brain-bending improvisational safaris into rugged sonic terrains previously uncharted. The band's instrumentalists, particularly lead guitarist Yor McKay, bassist Jack Cassidy, and drummer Spencer Dryden, were widely praised for their aptitude as innovative players. Others gravitated mainly toward the distinctive voices of Grace Slick, Marty Balin, and Paul Kantner, and to their words, which any two listeners, including quite often those in the band, might interpret differently, or might choose not to interpret at all. Some perceived the Airplane, from around 1968 on anyway, as a politically oriented band, while others preferred the love songs or their impressionistic works. Some thought of them just as a dance band, and for sure they were that too. Music to take large quantities of drugs and go berserk to. Yeah, nothing wrong with that. The Airplane fits all of those descriptions and more. That's what kept them alive for 7 years. When all of those components came together, a force beyond the members' control took over and transformed Jefferson Airplane into a mind-altering substance. That they attained greatness on many occasions goes without saying. That they had their bad nights does too. The Airplane was a constantly mutating organism. No two albums were alike, and personnel changed several times. Concerts were unpredictable. One never knew where they would head next, and neither did they. Kantner describes the Airplane as an orchestra without rules. That's how they and their faithful liked it. That it couldn't last forever was virtually written into the script. A lot of people have asked me how I became an Airplane fan and ended up here talking to you guys about a book I wrote about them, especially seeing how I grew up on the East Coast on Long Island of all places. And like a lot of other people on that, like I was saying before, when I heard Somebody Love and White Rabbit, etc., I just knew that this music was speaking to me in a way that nothing else quite had. And there's no doubt to me, and I think even I knew it then, that a band like the Airplane had to come out of San Francisco. It wasn't going to be a New York band or an LA band, and it had to happen in the 1960s. This is not a 70s band, it's not something that could have occurred in the 50s. It's uniquely San Franciscan and 60s. What's interesting also is that a lot of people assume because I was from New York that I was into like bands like the Velvet Underground. And the thing is, none of us heard of the Velvet Underground. I think there were 13 people that actually heard of the Velvet Underground at one time. And people that I knew, we went to see the Airplane and Dead, and Janis and Santana and a lot of the British groups, etc. And I don't know, Velvet Underground, I love them, but it wasn't happening at the time. Sorry. Don't know why they think that, but anyway. So yeah, the Airplane's music kind of validated to me the idea that what was going in San Francisco was something I really felt in my heart and my brain and needed to be a part of, so kind of just latched onto it. I've given a lot more thought to it since 1967, especially since writing this book, and I think another thing that you could say about the Airplane is that, like the 60s themselves, the Airplane really were a result of random factors coming together. This was not a planned thing. I mean, the fact that Marty met Paul in a club, and saw Paul go up on stage, plug in his guitar, sing about 2 words, unplug his guitar and say, I don't feel like doing this, and then said, do you want to be in a band, guy? I mean, these things just don't happen today, you know. And, you know, from there they hooked up with Sigby Anderson, a female singer who was also singing in the same club, and auditioned Yorma, who knew Paul back in their folky days in Santa Clara, et cetera, and eventually Spencer got into the band, and Grace, of course. You know, the 60s itself was just a bunch of random factors. I mean, this is a period when you had acid coming into the fore, you had Vietnam happening, and JFK assassination, and the anti-war movement, the space exploration, the civil rights movement, and sexual revolution, all this other stuff. And I think the Airplane was really the first band that kind of personified all these convergences for me. So how did I end up becoming the guy to write this book? Okay. Let's see, this goes back to about 1992 when RCA Records decided they were going to put out a box set on the Airplane, and there really weren't too many rock journalists at that time that were interested in this band anymore, so I volunteered myself to write the liner notes, and RCA said, sure, anybody wants to do it, fine with me. Subsequently, after that, they hired me to write liner notes for pretty much the entire catalog, and I'm still doing that today, actually. So by the late 90s, I was kind of had my fill of writing about Jefferson Airplane, to tell you the truth, and how many ways can you say the same thing? But a lot of people kept saying, you know, you should really do a book on this band. There's never been one, and the world really needs one. And the more I thought about it, I realized, you know, this is really a good idea. So pitched the idea around, and just as soon as we started pitching the idea around, Grace came out with her autobiography, and I got about 12 rejections saying, who needs your book? We had Grace's. But luckily, Simon & Schuster said, okay, we'll try that, and 5 years later, here we are. Yeah, one of the things that I decided right away upon deciding to do this book was that because I had built up these working relationships from doing the liner notes, I wanted to involve the band. Like I said before, all the members are still alive, and there's no reason for me to tell their story when they're here to tell it. So I decided right away I was going to involve all the members and pretty much everybody I could find that ever worked with them or knew them. And it was great. They were really cooperative. Everybody was really gave me everything I needed. And I just felt like I was kind of in the midst, as I began talking to them, I felt like I was in the midst of telling the great last untold story of the 60s. I couldn't believe that this stuff had never really been put together before. And you know, one thing I also enjoyed about talking to them was that they're all really intelligent, highly opinionated, and fascinating people, all very different people. And it was just really interesting to me getting into that with them and sort of putting the pieces together about how their lives converged when they did, and they became this band that we all love. So yeah, basically I decided, okay, I didn't want to do phone interviews with them, even though I knew they were all over the country. So basically started calling up all the band members and asking if it was okay if I invited myself over to their houses and made myself at home for a while. And luckily they all said, great, sure, come on out. And you know, 5 years later, I'm really glad I did it that way. And even though I've devoted so much time to doing this, I'm glad I did it with a band that I love this much, because I don't think I could do this with Britney Spears. You know? Another thing I decided, being that there wasn't a book on the Airplane, I wanted this to be as definitive as possible, because I'm not sure if anybody else will ever get a chance to do this with all the members' involvement. So my own background as a journalist, I always specialize in these sort of in-depth biographical studies. I was editor of a magazine called Goldmine, and that's what we did. It was like 20,000 word stories. And if you love the band, great. If you don't, you throw that shit in the garbage, because it took up the whole magazine, basically. So yeah, anyway, I had no idea this was going to take 5 years, and if I had known that, I might not be here. I might have a real job instead. But glad I stuck it out. It was a lot of fun. So anyway, as I started speaking to all the musicians individually, as I was saying before, I would ask a question and get completely different answers from everybody. And then I would call Bill Thompson on the phone, their manager, say, Bill, I have 6 different answers to this question. Which one is right? And he said, well, none of them. You know, give me his version. And usually Bill was closer to the truth, I figured out. A classic example of this is there's a story in the book about a party in early 1968. The Airplane were invited to Washington, D.C. to play a telethon for Bobby and Ethel Kennedy. Kennedy was just about to announce his candidacy for the presidency, and supposedly he was an Airplane fan. If not, he liked to tell people he was, because he probably thought he would get the youth vote. In any case, his kids were definitely fans. As the band found out when they went there, they had their records on their jukebox and posters and all that. So anyway, the airplane flew out to D.C. and they played this telethon, and it was kind of a controversial event because when they got there, Bill asked Pierre Salinger, who was the Kennedy's press secretary, if he'd want to sit in with the band. He was an accomplished pianist. And since they were lip syncing anyway, it didn't really matter. So Pierre Salinger said, sure, I'll do that. And the song that they played, some of you are probably familiar with, was Rejoice, which has a line in there that says, which Grace says, I'd rather have my country die for me. And that went directly against JFK's inaugural speech of ask not what your country can do for you. So there was a bit of controversy after that. Anyway, I was interviewing all the band members about this particular event in their lives, and they all pretty much told me the same thing. But when I got to Marty said, we smoked dope with Bobby Kennedy that day. I said, wow, this is great. This is going to get this story in all the gossip papers, and get a lot of press from this. And I don't think anybody ever knew that Bobby Kennedy got high before. So basically, I called up Bill again. I said, Bill, what's going on here? Everybody says one thing. Marty's telling me another story. And Bill said, Marty never left the hotel room. So anyway, that's the kind of thing I dealt with for a long time. Anyway, another reason this book took as long as it did was the publishing industry itself. There were a lot of things that just took forever. Some of them were legal issues. Some of you who are familiar with the airplane story intimately know that their first manager was a man named Matthew Cates, the evil rock manager personified. I did approach Matthew to be interviewed for the book several times. He refused me, and we had to deal with a lot of legal issues involving his part in the book because the man is the most litigious human being on the planet. In fact, if you look up, there's this website called LexisNexis, and you basically find that anybody that's suing anybody. And I did a search for Matthew and found out he had, I think, 55 pending lawsuits. This is just a few years ago. So anyway, we had to really walk on eggshells with this guy. Another off the topic, Matthew's story. This is just a recent story I heard, give you an idea about the way this guy operates. He lives down in Malibu, and he owns a horse, right? And the horse escaped from his backyard, ran into the neighbor's yard. The horse kicks Matthew. Matthew sues the neighbor. Right? So, that's what I was dealing with, that kind of stuff. So anyway, eventually I had all this information gathered, hundreds and hundreds of hours of interviews and file cabinets full of paperwork. Joel Selvin of the Chronicle gave me his entire airplane file, which is great. And just, pretty much everything I could find on eBay ever written about them, I bought it. So at that point, I had so much. I knew the story was much more than I ever bargained for, and I called my editor and said, look, I have all this stuff. I know I'm contracted to do a 400-page book, but there's no way. And he said, well, just write the book you want. We'll deal with that later. So I wrote the book I want, and it came out to 1,300 pages. By that, this book has been around for so long that I went through 3 editors. And by the time I finished that 1,300-page draft, took the book to my second editor, and I said, look, it's 1,300 pages. And she said, yeah, go back, trim it down to a real book. So I trimmed it down to 750 pages. Didn't like that either. Finally got it down to the book that you see here, and that's one reason it took as long as it did. But it was really gratifying to do the whole thing, and made a lot of friends along the way, and had a good time. Another interesting thing is a lot of people have asked me about the way the book is structured, and what I did basically was to take the quotes that I got from all the band members and kind of insert them into the story to illustrate points. And I really sort of structured the book as a novel. My wife, Caroline Levitt, sitting over here, is a novelist with a lot of experience. And one thing she impressed on me throughout this whole ordeal was, keep in mind, you're telling a story. This isn't just concert dates and who played where and who came and went and all that stuff. It's a story, and people have to be able to turn the page and read the story. So I really kind of structured this as a novel, and in a way it almost reads as one because some of it's so hard to believe. And, I put cliffhangers in there and make sure you guys would actually want to get to the end and all that stuff. But that was fun. And the other thing she really impressed upon me was treat these people as characters, even though they're real, they're alive. They're characters in a book, and that character's all right, that's for sure. So, but that's the way I approached the book and why I did it the way I did, and didn't just kind of cram all this information in there. Experience of writing the book. Let me see here. Oh, this is, I mentioned before that I went to everybody's homes and spent time with them, and didn't really want to sit on the phone for 5 hours because I figured they'd be watching TV or something while they were talking to me, you know. So eventually everybody was nice enough and let me come to their homes and interview them. At one point I was down in Malibu interviewing Grace, and she was being great. We were sitting there for about 3 hours and talking, and she had a lot to say, and you know, her usual Grace self. And all of a sudden she said, you know, you've been here all day and I haven't even offered you anything to drink. And I was thinking, oh great, here comes the vodka, you know. But you know, she just made iced tea, and she said, I'll get you an iced tea. I said, great. And she actually started talking for about another hour, and finally after this other hour she said, well, let me go get you that iced tea. And I said, okay. I was sitting there on her couch in her living room. All of a sudden it dawned on me, I'm sitting on Grace Slick's couch in her living room. It's like, you know, where was I 25 years ago? But that's when the fan in me really came out, because even though I've been writing about music and, you know, met a lot of celebrities, quote, quote, and written about music for 25 years, there's this part of me that's still obviously a fan, or else I wouldn't be still doing this. And it just suddenly struck me that this is really cool to be doing this and, you know, hanging out with these people, because I really idolized them all growing up. They're all pretty cool people. So, yeah, you can't write an airplane book. A lot of people say, you know, what about the drugs? Ooh, you know, and you know, you can't write about Jefferson Airplane without talking about drugs. This is the band that invented sex and drugs and rock and roll. Let's face it. And you know, yeah, it was important to what they were and what they did, but you know, as Paul always likes to say, it wasn't the whole meal. You know, the drugs are kind of like the dessert after a really good 8-course meal. And you know you can't separate it, and you also have to see the good side of it, which, you know, getting high really helped these people be creative, for what it's worth. You know, some people might not think so, but they did. And then, you know, of course, later on things changed, and the drugs got weirder, and people started dying, and you know, some people had more trouble than others. But I didn't want to soft pedal that, you know, just because we're living in a George Bush world. You know, this happened, and it's real. You know. The other thing is the sexual aspect of it. Everybody knows Grace slept with everybody in the band except Marty. Let's get over it, folks. You know, you know, nobody really thought much about that in those days. It's just the way things were, and you know, it was cool. You know, so another thing, I didn't want to play that down. I didn't want to play it up too much either. It's just the way that people lived. They were about experimenting with lifestyle and being willing to break away from the norm, and nobody did it quite like Jefferson Airplane. Yeah, the other thing, a lot of people think of the Airplane as a political band, and that's always kind of surprising, because even though that was an aspect of what they were doing, again, it wasn't really a dominant part of what they were doing. They really didn't write any political songs until their 4th album, Crown of Creation, and then a few more on Volunteers. And when you talk to each member of the band, it's really just Paul and Grace that had any real interest in writing about that. So I think they've kind of been unfairly branded as a political band, even though it was a part of what they did. I mean, Marty's love songs were an equally, if not more important part of what they did, and you know, Yorma's material and everything else they did. The other thing I wanted to stress with this book was that it was really kind of a creative burst in general at that point. It wasn't just like San Francisco rock music that was happening. This is going on all over the world in the arts and film and music and literature, and it was really an explosion that I don't think had happened before, and really hasn't happened since. And as far as the impact of that, you know, some people think, oh, you know, the 60s was over and all this stuff died, but a couple of years ago, I live in Hoboken, New Jersey, right? And there's a McDonald's in my town. I was walking past this McDonald's, and there was a sign for whatever special they were having, you know, Nick whatever. And this poster was basically done as a San Francisco Fillmore poster. And it suddenly occurred to me, wow, you know, this stuff's really ingrained into our culture now. Nobody really thinks twice about it. So yeah, mostly for me, that whole period was about growth and having fun and learning and experimenting and doing what you wanted to do, and these guys did it best. And I'm going to just read one more story here and then kind of open this up for questions. This is actually my favorite story in the book. It takes place a little, sort of near the end of the Airplane's run in 1971. The Airplane somehow managed to convince, or build it anyway, that convinced RCA Records to give them their own record label. The Beatles had their Apple label and kind of drove it into the ground, but Airplane got their own label anyway, and called it Grunt Records. And the idea was that they would put out not only their own group and solo records, but they could sign their friends. So Paul and Grace were living up in Bolinas at the time. And they signed a band called One, just numeral One. And this is the story of One. The other thing I should tell you about is there's another guy in this part of the book named Pat Iracy, who was the airplane's production coordinator. He's the guy that made sure the bills got paid, made sure everybody got there on time, and if Jack bought a pack of cigarettes, he was the one that had to log it in so people got paid right and all that. Pat was called Maurice, and Maurice was the one responsible for kind of logging in these new bands that were being signed to Grunt Records. And here's what happened when One got signed to Grunt Records. Oh yeah, I should also mention that this takes place, this is coming out of a part of the book where I'm talking about a gala party that the airplane threw when they launched this record label. So, one of the more curious acts was a group called One, acquaintances of Paul's and Grace's from Bolinas. A 9-piece ensemble, they engaged in lengthy drifting tunes that drew as much from raga as from rock, with touches of jazz and country. The leader of the group was a mysterious man who went by the name Reality D. Blipcrotch. Couldn't make this stuff up. He vocalized in his own unique way, often wordlessly. A former Marine, no one knew anything about him, not even his original name. He had it changed legally, swears Bill Thompson. Just as an aside, I always wondered what happened to this guy, so I did a Google search a couple months ago. And I'd never been able to find him while I was researching the book, but he finally turned up. He's actually living in the Netherlands, and he's still called Reality D. Blipcrotch. He's still making music. So, anyway, the making of One's self-titled album for Grunt, released in 1972, is a tale that defines the nutty, out-of-control tenor of the post-Aquarian times, as well as the airplane's utter inability to run a serious business. This is where Maurice comes in with his quotes. And Maurice, you have to understand, he's an Italian guy from Brooklyn. He's got a really thick Brooklyn accent. It's really funny as hell, this guy. I don't do a good Brooklyn accent even though I'm from there originally. So. Anyway, just think of a guy with a Brooklyn accent going. This guy Reality comes into my office and he's smoking a joint made out of newspaper. Maurice, I want to do a recording, but I got to do it on a certain day and I want to do it in Bolinas. I'm waiting for this wave to come in. I said, wave? Yeah. At 4:32 on a particular day, a wave is coming in and I want you to record this wave. Record the wave. You want me to set up recording equipment at the ocean? How am I going to know which wave? And I want you in a rowboat. I want a microphone for the top of the wave and a microphone for the bottom. I said, Jacques Cousteau is who you got to call, not me. Ever the trooper, Maurice actually made arrangements to have recording equipment dragged down to the ocean in Bolinas to record Reality D. Blipcrotch on his perfect wave. But Iracy's ordeal was far from over, even after the wave crashed. Reality was still orbiting high above planet Reality. Pat, Maurice says, we get it all mixed down, it sounds like waves. Then I said, I'm going to go to Indianapolis and make test pressings. I'll listen to it and I'll call you. He says, before you go to Indianapolis, I want a couple of special things. I take out my pen and he says, on band 3, bar 30, I want a marijuana leaf to pop out. I write down, band 3, bar 30, marijuana leaf pop out. Pop out of the record. He's putting me on, right? But I write it down. One more thing. At the end of side 2, as it rejects, I want the record to self-destruct. So I write down, end of side 2, self-destruct. Why do you want it to self-destruct? Because they'll go out and buy it again and I'll get double sales. He leaves, I take the pad, I throw it out. 2.5, 3 weeks later, he calls me up and he's yelling. Later he comes in, takes the test pressing, flings it against the wall and it cracks. He said, you lied, you cheated. I said, what are you talking about? What's wrong with the test pressing? You told me a marijuana leaf's going to pop out in the third band on bar 30. And I played side 2 until I'm blue in the face and the damn thing never reached its self-destruct. End of story. As a lot of you probably know, we have several special guests in the audience tonight, and I'd like to acknowledge their presence here, and then if they're interested, they can come up and answer your questions, along with me answering whatever questions. Let's start with the guy who, without this guy, there would be no Jefferson Airplane, because there would be no Marty Balin, his dad, Joe Buchwald. This guy, somebody asked us on the radio today when I was we were doing an interview together, how do you manage a band like Jefferson Airplane? And you don't, but this guy managed to do it throughout the entire history of the airplane Starship, Jefferson Starship, Hot Tuna, he managed them all, Bill Thompson. Sitting next to Bill.
He did it.
This is how he did it, yeah. A lot of you know about 2400 Fulton Street, the airplane's palatial mansion, which also doubled as their office. She was the one that kept it from burning down and basically managed the office. This is Jackie Sardi. You might have known her as Jackie Tamarkin. Sitting back on that bench over there, when you went to see the airplane at the Fillmore or almost anywhere else from Monterey until almost the end of the run, saw a great light show, and Glenn McKay's headlights.
Yeah.
And kind of hiding back there by the pole with that great hat is the man who played keyboards and bass for Jefferson Starship for many, many, many years, and later played with Hot Tuna, basic solo records, Pete Sears. And definitely, last but not least, the airplane went through probably as many drummers as Spinal Tap. This is the one everybody thinks of, Spencer Dryden. Other people are supposed to be here, and I don't know if they have. Is Peter here? Yeah. Peter Kalkinen. Peter Kalkinen. Peter, of course, probably one of the few people that can say he played with Airplane, Jefferson Starship, and Hot Tuna, and has also had his own band, Black Kangaroo, and currently has a new record that he's putting together. And I don't know if Cynthia made it or Chet Holmes, but they were supposed to be here. So if they're here, make yourselves known. All right, so anybody wants to ask any questions of me or any of our guests, I think we'll start doing that. Do you guys want to turn around and address people or just kind of sit where you are? How do you want to do this? Anyway, fire away at any of us and we'll see what happens.
Jeff, my question is, what preconception that you may have had, knowing a lot about the band, got this dispelled while making the book? What was the thing that surprised you, the biggest surprise that you had?
Before I started the book, or when I started, I'd already had,
throughout the whole,
because I'd already had 6 or so years of doing liner notes and getting to know the people, but I guess I didn't know the level of dysfunction, but right? But at the same time, I was really gratified to find out just how wonderful and intelligent and witty they all are, and like I said at the beginning, a lot of people think that their memories are shot because they took a lot of drugs and a rock band, but ain't the case. I mean, every single one of these persons gave me great stories and really knew their stuff, so that was pretty cool. One little factoid I didn't know was that Spencer here was a nephew of Charlie Chaplin, which I guess he never told anybody for some reason.
I didn't let them know either.
No, he had.
He never let the band know, so that was kind of cool to find out.
Which wife?
Which wife of Charlie?
God.
Well, no, he was my uncle.
Charlie was your uncle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right, okay.
Not my dad.
Right, no, right, okay. Anybody else? Way back there.
I haven't read the book yet, of course, but I'm just wondering where seems Holly Anderson is she doing all right these days?
I haven't spoken to her in a few months, but she was having some troubles, some health problems and some financial problems, and a bunch of people got together and did a benefit for her down here and helped her out a bit. And as far as I know, she's doing pretty good. She's pretty well right now. Yeah. Right there.
1,300 pages.
Yeah.
Boy, that's for
Oh, and everybody wants that version. You know what? It's really better as 400 pages. There's so much stuff that you don't want to know. But yeah, basically what I've been doing is picking. Oh, Jeanette Sears. We didn't introduce you. Pete's wife. I'm sorry. Jeanette wrote wrote a lot of the Starship songs later on. The 1,300-page version. What I'm doing basically is I have a website for the book, outofrevolution.com. And I'm taking some of the expanded versions of stories and putting them on the website, and probably some of the stuff that didn't make it to the final book. And there's some great stuff on there, like the story of the Starship's 1978 Germany tour, which is just a harrowing tale that everybody I spoke to had a lot to say about. Lots of fun, yeah. So yeah, that's probably all I'll be doing with it for now. I mean, maybe somewhere down the line, but contractually I can't really do anything with it. So. we'll see what happens. Yeah. Rich.
I have two questions. The first one you don't have to answer, which is if you got anything to do with the book next to you called Lisa's Airplane Trip.
My son wrote it.
For a different audience.
Yes.
The second is kind of a writer's question, and that is whether, given your long-standing respect and fandom for the band, whether that created any challenges for you as a writer, or whether you were self-conscious about
Yeah, you know,
about the tone of the book.
Yeah, I really made up my mind right from the start that this wasn't going to be a quote authorized biography, and all the band members respected that. They, you know, I told them flat out, look, some things are going to be said you might not like. Some of them will be from people you were in the bands with, you know. And not a single person had a problem with that, really. They, you know, they sort of understood that this is the way the story was going to be written, and I was going to do my best to tell the truth. And you know, so far so good. Haven't had any lawsuits yet, anyway. I kind of expected Matthew to come here today, but yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, so when you were sitting on Grace's couch, that ice cream,
Yeah.
did whatever cross your mind that maybe you could maybe score with her too?
Well, my wife's in the audience. Carefully. No. But actually, somebody else told me a story that they were sitting on the same couch, and they at one point reached between the pillows, and she had a gun in there. So some things never change. Anyway, I didn't say that. Yeah. Ben.
What are the possibilities of a film?
Well, I might take up praying for this. Right? Yeah, I think it would make a great film. You know, I mean, the characters in the story, and they could make a film on Sweetwater. Come on, you know.
Nancy wrote that. So.
Oh, whoops. But, you know,
Stillwater.
yeah, right. But I think it would be great. I hope somebody down in Hollywood or Lucas or Spielberg or somebody, you know, discovers this story. It would be great, really. They're really colorful people. I mean, the Marty and Grace story alone is worth a film. You know, it's one of the great sexual tension love stories of all time. Love-hate stories. Yeah.
Is RCA or anybody else planning to release any airplane recordings?
Next month. They're starting the catalog all over again, I think for the 4th time. This time, they're redoing the first 4 albums, starting with Takes Off, Surrealistic Pillow, Baxter's, and Crown Creation. Bonus tracks on all of them, which are really cool. And RCA doesn't want you guys to know this, but I'll tell you anyway. After the bonus tracks, there are hidden tracks on each one, so listen for that. Some really cool stuff. There's one track that's basically Yorma jamming on country tunes, like the stuff he's doing now, but like in '68. So listen for that. But yeah, they sound really good. A guy named Bob Irwin is doing the mastering, and he is the masterer, so listen for those. I think the eventual plan is to do the whole catalog all over again, get rid of all the garbage that's been floating around, the roar of Jefferson Airplane, love songs, terrible compilations that are out there. Anyway.
Are they going to release any previously unreleased recordings?
Well, each album will have previously unreleased bonus tracks on them, and the next plan is to re-release the box set. Jefferson Airplane Loves You. Get rid of all the stuff that everybody has already. You know, we all have White Rabbit. We don't need it anymore. And to put some of the unreleased stuff that didn't make the first cut on there. Yeah.
Is there much footage around, film-wise?
There's not as much as you would think, at least not that I've seen. Just yesterday, somebody showed me some footage from I think it was called the Magic Mountain Festival in downtown.
Yeah.
Never knew it existed. You know,
Sure.
but it was great stuff. So there's
Sounds
got.
like Chaplin, a lot of people.
Yeah, he has the whole festival too. So yeah, I mean it's out there, and Bill's actually been talking to some people about possibly getting a DVD going. So hopefully, yeah.
Where are the members living and what are they doing?
Okay, all of them.
Sure.
I don't know. All right. Let's do like from Takes Off through Starship. No. Well, let's start with the main folks here. Spencer lives up in Petaluma, and doesn't play anymore, right? Doesn't play anymore. Grace also retired. She lives down in Malibu. She paints now. She retired after the 1989 Airplane reunion tour. And Grace's famous quote, which you'll see in every interview she gives from now until for the rest of her life, is, "I don't like old people on a rock and roll stage." And you know, she was saying this from 50. She's 62 now, and you know, she has a point when you see certain bands. But you know, like everybody, I'd love to see her get out there and do something again. Paul and Marty still have Jefferson Starship going. They have, I keep calling them new members, but some of these people have been with the band 12 years already. And they're great, they're still good. Yorma and Jack still go out as Hot Tuna several times a year, and Yorma just put out a record called Blue Country Heart last year that was nominated for a Grammy. He lives in Ohio, of all places, where he runs a guitar camp called Fur Peace Ranch, and it's very successful. Brings in a lot of guests who teach there. And Jack just put out his first solo album ever last month called Dream Factor, and it's really good. And Jack lives in Beverly Hills, so there. Got over on the bed. Got something out of all of this. Yeah. Anyway. Oh, Paul. How can we forget Paul? Yeah, Paul's still in San Francisco and always will be. And yeah, what I mentioned he's still in Jefferson Starship, and he lives in San Francisco, down by the ocean. Back that away. Can Spencer talk about working with Bill Graham? What aspect of working with Bill Graham? Spencer.
Yeah. Who asked? Christopher. How you doing, man? What do you want to know? Why'd we replace him? He's driving Grace and me nuts. No, very honestly, man, we were kind of little, you know. I used to weigh a lot less than I do now. And he had the right idea for a manager. Like a manager wants to exploit his product as much as possible. And Bill had the right idea, you know, strike while the iron is hot. But he had us going all over the damn country, sometimes playing 2 gigs in a day, then coming home, maybe for a couple of weeks, then going back out and doing it again, playing everything from big concerts to state fairs. And there was really precious little time to write and to like maybe concentrate on the next record. And everybody bitched about it, but only Grace and I did something about it. We finally just got tired. And so we made an ultimatum to the band and said, you know, it's about up to here. If it doesn't stop, if he doesn't go, Grace and I are out. You know, and we were the 2 guys in the band that had not signed with RCA. So we really had, you know, it was a pretty sweet out. And we had also been offered a separate deal by David Anderle from A&M Records. And because everybody in Hollywood and New York knew that Grace wasn't signed. And Grace and I were kind of an item at that time. So where she went, I went. You know, it was a kind of a stupid power play. And people have asked me, would you have done it? Would you do it again knowing now? Yeah, because very honestly, it didn't ruin our relationship with Bill. It allowed Bill to still run the Fillmore West and the Fillmore East and become the largest concert promoter in the world. And it allowed us to do our own thing. And thank God for Bill Thompson, who was basically, he was originally Marty's roommate, and then he became Bill Graham's right-hand man. So anything that Bill Graham did, Bill Thompson was in the office watching. And so he knew exactly what to do, but he was kind of one of us, as opposed to Bill being a real smart New York businessman. And you know, there was just that kind of little grating between, you know, Bill didn't quite see things in the same colors we do. And so it just came down to the fact, I think that he was better off without us, you know. We got in his crawl all the time. He used to say, they cross the street, it's got to be a damn ballet, you know. You know, and it was true. We had like, there were 6 guys in the band, including Grace as a guy. And 6 egos, you know, and it was basically, what was it you said earlier? About, I don't know, somebody said about something, 6 people looking for something.
The orchestra without rules? Orchestra without rules?
An orchestra without rules. I always called it 6 musicians in search of an arrangement. because every one of us had a different idea of how to play the goddamn song. You know, and I'm not listening to you, man, I'm going this way. This is the way it's gonna be, which I guess made it interesting for audiences, you know? And probably drove Graham right up the wall. But the fact is, we were still able to work shows with him after that. We still remained friends. Bill and I it was a little bit dicey between the two of us. But years later, I went down to his office, and that's when I had left the band and joined the New Riders, and I was doing other things, and I think I wanted something. I forget what it was. I wanted a favor. I wanted to have the Riders on a show or something. And so I said, Bill, can I come down to your office? And so we still talked. I used to ask him for free tickets and stuff. And he used to get mad, like if I brought like 2 girls or something. He said, you can't just bring one, you have to have 2. But I went to his office and I sat down with him and I very seriously said, you know, is all the water under the bridge? You know, do we have anything between us that should still be hashed out? And he said, no, man, it was a long time ago. And so we kind of, you know, we each went on our way, and the airplane did what it was going to do, and Bill was still involved. I mean, all the way through Woodstock and everything else. And we still did shows with him on New Year's Eve, Thanksgiving. So that's basically the story about me and Bill. Okay?
Does anybody else have any questions for any of the other guests in the audience? Going once, going twice. All right. Any for me before we wrap it up? That's not. Well, thank you all for coming. We're going to be signing books on the other end of the store.
We have some details.